Soviet Union was a state that existed from 1922 to 1991, that once threatened the world's existence with nuclear weapons and extended its influence over every continent through a mix of political and military influence in an attempt to compete with the United States of America, only to vanish overnight in December of 1991. This was the Soviet Union, a state whose collapse not only stunned the world, but also ended one of the most dominant forces of the 20th century. Today, we'll discuss the collapse of the Soviet Union and the factors that led to the sudden disappearance of one of the largest empires in history, both in size and industrial might. Through historical records from sources such as the United States Department Archives and witness accounts documented by institutions like the National Security Archive, we can analyze the complex web that unraveled in the unmaking of the Soviet state. We'll explore three key factors that contributed to this collapse: economic failures, political instability, and the poor allocations of resources by the Soviet state. First, let's examine the economic failures that plagued the Soviet Union. The state allocated a massive amount of resources towards arms races and space races with the United States of America, which drained resources that could have been focused on diversifying the Soviet economy. As detailed by the US State Department, the oil industry, which was the cornerstone of the Soviet economy, failed to keep up with demands needed to sustain the Soviet economy. The decline in oil production, coupled with the failing prices and the command economy, failed to keep up with the needs of the Soviet state. It was ineffective in managing the resources that it had and putting them where they needed to be, unlike the private economies of its opponents, who were based on supply and demand and allowed resources to be allocated where they were needed. Next, we touch on the political instability that shook the very foundation of the Soviet Union. According to records by the National Archives, Joseph Stalin's reign of terror and cult of personality left a dark legacy that impacted future political presidents in the Soviet Union, such as the eventual overthrow of Nikita Khrushchev, who attempted to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union. Internal coups and power struggles within the Communist Party, as reported by the National Security Archive, led to policies that were poorly thought out and lacked coherence. When Mikhail Gorbachev attempted political reforms, they implemented they were implemented too rapidly, causing shocks that rippled throughout the nation, resulting in a coup that did not almost, resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Union, as nations within it felt that the Union was no longer a union, but a dictatorship. These reforms, intended to modernize the political system, ultimately highlighted its deep rooted flaws, accelerating the Soviet collapse. Lastly, the poor allocation of resources within the Soviet Union was one of the biggest factors that led to its collapse. The state focused most of its resources on the military and putting money into developing new weapons and taking away money from the civilian economy. The State Department's historical overview indicates that this led to widespread shortages of consumer goods, such as tampons, which were often required to be made at home by women. Consumer goods were often off the market and couldn't be found anywhere, compared to Western nations whose private sectors, based again on supply and demand, were able to keep up with the needs of the nation. With consumer goods scarce and an inefficient system controlling their economy, and the quality being poor, this led to the Soviet Union being unstable within the civilian sector. As we finish our analysis of these key factors, it is crucial to understand that it wasn't just these elements that played a role in the Soviet Union. It was a combination of these factors and a myriad of other ones that started in 1922 all the way to 1991 that was the reason for the collapse of the Soviet state. The Soviet Union, like a whale, left a lasting impression on the world, creating an ecosystem for new nations to grow and prosper, while presenting both new opportunities and challenges. As captured in the National Archives documentations, it is incredible to consider that once a web unravels, everything entangled within it unravels as well. The collapse of the Soviet state serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of even the largest empires and the complex factors that leads to their downfalls.